Okay, so it took me forever, but I finally beat The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess. And I gotta say, after almost 30 hours of playing this game, I surprisingly don't completely know how I feel about it. There were definitely some pros, definitely some cons, but I was kind of questioning throughout the entire experience, is this game more overrated or underrated in terms of Zelda entries? I feel like most top 10 Zelda lists put this around that number 9, number 10 spot, but some put it a little bit higher in the top 5 column, and IGN apparently put this as number 13, which still surprises me. But I gotta say, I'm not completely sure where I would put it. And that was a question I had all throughout playing this game. But I gotta say, there were some things I liked and didn't like, so let's get into it. To begin, let's talk about maybe the biggest negative of this entire game, and that is the pacing. The pacing of this game is wonderfully bad, and that's not to say that this game is incredibly boring, but just the pacing of everything feels off. The beginning portion of this game takes forever. Just to get to the first dungeon has multiple prologue sections, which do a good job of introducing you to the characters, but just feel like a bit too much. I mean, getting into the adventure is certainly important, and again, introducing the characters is also certainly important, but this game just does so much before finally you enter into the forest temple. And I mean, yeah, some of it is useful in the future, but I gotta say, the first 3 dungeons, the build up to them just took so long. And honestly, up until you get the Master Sword, this game's pacing is incredibly slow and obnoxious, especially because you have to transform into the Twilight Realm as Wolf Link, and then get all of these light orbs in these different areas that you will have to explore at least 2 or 3 times before you can move on to the next dungeon. This is just an insanely long process, and it takes so much game time. In fact, this portion isn't even supposed to take up half of the game, yet I'm pretty sure it took up at least 60% of my playtime, which is kind of ridiculous. Also, the dungeons in this game, I will say I like them, but not all of them. The first dungeon is the Forest Temple, and this one is incredibly long and not particularly memorable. In fact, I can hardly remember anything from this dungeon other than the fact that it was the first dungeon. The second one is within Goron Mountain, which is fine enough, but this one's also incredibly slow paced, especially as you have to slowly go across these magnetic roofs with the iron boots. It's not my favorite thing in the world. And then the third dungeon, which is more or less this game's version of the Water Temple, way better than the Water Temple in Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, but still not great. This one's also incredibly slow. The fourth dungeon is Arbiter's Grounds, and this is where the game was starting to get good for me. We have this sort of desert temple, which is like Indiana Jones themed, and it is just lovely. This one actually felt like a sense of adventure and gave me that puzzle spirit that I was really looking for in this game. And then the dungeon after that is basically a snowy mansion, and it works really well with some very creative puzzle aspects. I still consider Arbiter's Ground the best dungeon, but some people consider the Snow Peak Mansion to actually be the best dungeon, possibly even in Zelda history. I mean, it was pretty good. I don't know about that good. And then the next one is the Temple of Time, and this was just classic Zelda, and honestly, I kind of loved it. And then we have City in the Sky, which basically goes back to the origins of the first few dungeons in this game. It takes forever for you to get there, and the dungeon lasts forever and is not particularly memorable. Yeah, not a great ending, but the Palace of Twilight and Hyrule Castle definitely make up for it. And while I'm not going to spoil what happens in those, they are definitely more like action-packed dungeons over the traditional puzzles. I mean, they still have puzzles, but they're much more simple. And yeah, those are all the dungeons in the game. I gotta say, the first three I was not living with, but the other ones were actually quite good. So yeah, the puzzles in this game are fantastic. But one thing that I like even more than the puzzles in this game is the story. The story of Twilight Princess pads out to around 30 hours, so it better be good, and luckily this one delivers. And that's because the story follows Link in a more interesting perspective, so you could say. First of all, Link is 100% a hero in this game, more than I would argue any other game in the series. All of the village kids completely look up to him, and he's seen as the strong, bold, and courageous character all throughout. There's no challenge that Link is going to back down from, and that's what I really appreciate about this character. You can definitely see why he would have the Triforce of Courage, because he feels like Link in this story. But also, we are quickly introduced to Midna after all of the townsfolk characters in Ordon Village, and Midna is a lovely sidekick. In fact, I would argue that of all of the side, characters helping you out in Zelda games, such as Fi or Proxy or Navi, Midna is highly regarded as the best of these characters, and I gotta say, I completely agree. Midna is actually kind of funny sometimes, and she has a true personality rather than just being a robot like Fi in Skyward Sword. And honestly, I really appreciate how that works in this game. And the game really takes it to its advantage, especially given that she doesn't really care about what's going on within the land of Hyrule at first, but slowly grows to appreciate it. And also, I love her goals of trying to become back into her role of the Twilight Princess. It's all just done incredibly well, and I really love how Midna's character progresses throughout this entire game, from selfish at first to being willing to do anything to help out Link in the end. It's really cool, actually. And this also goes for all of the actual side characters in this game, especially the ones that you get to meet in Telma's bar, or even the kids in Ordon Village, especially Colin, who gets the character arc of being kind of scared, even though he definitely looks up to the courage of Link, then actually has his own little hero moment, saving one of the village kids from King Bulbin, only to be kidnapped himself. And this actually leads to the bridge scene in Twilight Princess, which might be my favorite part of the game, a classic jousting match between you and King Bulbin, who actually ends up being a pretty interesting villain within the story, because you kind of just think that he's following the rules of everyone else above him, but that isn't really the case. But either way, there are a lot of really good characters in this one, but unfortunately it doesn't make up for all of this game's mistakes. For as much as I liked some of the characters, I felt like there were also others that could have been built on more, especially for Zelda. She's just kind of the same throughout, and while I get having her be super wise and everything, it doesn't really feel like she's fleshed out much as a character, but that's hardly much of a critique. Another thing I'm going to comment on is the world of this game. Hyrule isn't really all that fun to explore in this one, and I gotta say, this game, even though I played the HD version, still doesn't look great, and I know I'm still comparing things to Wind Waker of a few videos ago, but I mean, you can kind of see how this one has aged, especially in the cutscenes, which sometimes were kind of hilarious, especially when they had to do with Ganondorf. Either way, I did appreciate a lot of my time with Twilight Princess. This game did a lot right, and I really appreciated much of that. However, it had so many pacing issues that it's hard for me to give it a really good score. It was hard for me to keep coming back to it because I knew how long and gruesome this game was at times, and exploring the world to go place to place just wasn't really enjoyable. It wasn't enjoyable at the beginning, and it didn't really make up for it at the end, so yeah. But when it comes to scoring this game, I was kind of unsure at first, but when I beat the final boss, the score just kind of popped in my head, and I'm going to stick with it. Though I will comment on the fact that my score to my Minish Cap video, I gave the Minish Cap a 7 out of 10, and I kind of regret that now, so I'm going to move that one up to an 8 out of 10, and I'm going to say that Twilight Princess is actually a 7 out of 10.